A Giants podcast for Giants fans
by Giants fans.
It's Shaun Morash.
On the sideline, into the end zone. Touchdown, Giants!
From the offseason through the wins and the losses, it's time to take one Giant step.
Oh, baby, welcome into One Giant Step, your weekly Giants podcast for Giants fans by Giants fans. Something I haven't said a long time here on One Giant Step. Bryce Gelman is with me. The Bryce is right. Shaun Morash here. Remember, you can download, subscribe free on the Audacy app everywhere podcasts are available. And this is our 2024 draft recap. We did a little round one instant reaction in real time. We found out Michael Penix was not going to be in play for the New York Giants as we were taping when the Falcons surprised the world, but the Giants did walk away with Malik Neighbors. So by now, the day we were taping this year, right after the weekend, if you're a diehard Giant fan, you know the names. Malik Neighbors, 6th overall, wide receiver LSU. Tyler Nubin, safety, Minnesota, 47th overall. That is the second rounder they got in the Leonard Williams deal. Andrew Phillips, cornerback with great versatility in round 3. And then day 3 featured, I thought, some really, really interesting picks. Theo Johnson, the tight end at Penn State. More out of him in a little bit. Fifth round pick. The 5th round pick. Yep, and we're going to talk about that. The 5th round pick ends up being Tyrone Tracy, a 24-year-old converted receiver to running back from Purdue, where already Brian Daboll said we could see him play wide receiver, not just running back. A guy with an emphasis on speed and power, and Darius Muwasu. I think I've gotten that right. I'll get it right. A linebacker to UCLA, a transfer from Hawaii. So let's just start here, Bryce. First of all, and there's a good nugget from Justin Pennick, who did the research on this. 32 teams in the NFL, 32 teams that had draft picks, anywhere ranging from a couple of the Rangers had I'm so in Ranger mode. The Giants had 6. Some teams had 11 picks or whatnot. The Giants, though, with their 6 picks, are the only team in the NFL to not draft either an offensive lineman or defensive lineman. So, in essence, with their 6 draft picks, the trenches were completely ignored. However, I do want to caveat that. They did trade a 2nd and a 5th round pick for Brian Burns, who is a pass rusher in the trenches. So, it's kind of an stat because, in essence, they probably got the best player available between any trenches by taking care of Brian Burns. So just from the standpoint of that, Bryce, knowing how bad the offensive line's been in recent years, does that stat mean anything to you, or overall you find with the philosophy they went with in this draft?
I mean, that's just what happens when you address those needs in free agency and through trades. You don't need to do it through the draft. You don't need to take a flyer on an unknown guy when you already have some guys you know could fill some holes and potentially produce in terms of offensive line production, defensive line production, and turning both of those sides, which have been the Giants' 2 biggest Achilles heels. I mean, less the defensive line, but that's kind of been their calling card and hasn't been up to par from what we've known from the 2007, 2011 teams. But this Giants team, without having to do it through the draft, they addressed their needs through free agency and trades. Like, I understand if there are Giants fans out there who think that this is a big deal, if they look at this stat and they're like, well, I'm saying he has no idea what he's doing. Like, I understand. I completely get it. But when you look at what this team has been, when you look at their complete misses in the draft at offensive line, we can go through every single one of them. We don't need to. You know the names. You're complaining now that they don't want to try to take a flyer on some guys who may not pan out? Is that really the worst thing in the world? They already look at what they have, and they're satisfied with it. They know that there's nothing they could have done in the draft to make them be in a better position to win than what they already did. So I think that's a positive, Shaun.
Yeah, I do too. And there's a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, the defensive line part. They have, I think, 2 premier pass rushers in the NFL right now, Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau on the edge, with Dexter Lawrence in the middle. Yeah, okay, they got rid of Leonard Williams. You can't pay everybody in the middle of that defensive line. They did throw 2 day 3 picks the last 2 years at DJ Davidson and Jordan Riley on the defensive line. So, again, you're supposed to just keep throwing day 3 picks on the defensive line. I don't really have an issue with that as well. Oh, by the way, Azeez Ojulari, pretty damn good guy to have as your 3rd edge rusher now, not counting on him to be the number 2. He's going to be a very forgotten guy. I think this might be the summer of Azeez for me. I'm going to remind everybody he's still pretty damn good when he plays.
Contract year, John.
True. And then offensive line-wise, man, you know, Okay. If you're not getting Joe Alt or one of the big tackles because you address wide receiver in round 1, the argument could be made some of these day 2, third-round guards when they take Drew Phillips. Okay, fine. However, they did that with Josh Azudu 2 years. I'm not ready to call him a bust. They kind of wasted this year or this past year with him, having him be the swing tackle, and he wasn't prepared to do that. They got guys in free agency, whether it was Illuminor, obviously Runyon, Aaron Stinney, and I generally get the idea of, hey, just always throw darts at the offensive line, try to develop them. Remember, though, you're only going to keep 9 of these guys on the roster and then a practice squad. If you're investing a third-round pick on a guard, he's going to have to be on the roster because he's going to get swooped up by somebody else if you cut him. Do you really have time for that third-round piece to be spent on a guard if he's not going to start? And then where are you going after you just added veteran pieces? So I'm sure they had offensive linemen on the board. I don't think this was one of those situations where they just were like, we're going to ignore O-line in the draft. But they have other needs too. And the Giants have spent a lot of draft capital. Just because they failed at it doesn't mean these bullets haven't existed. Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal, as I mentioned, Josh Azudu, to name a few in recent years. Eventually, you got to spend your draft capital elsewhere and not ignore the other holes on the team. And the Giants had significant holes in the secondary, especially with Xavier McKinney walking. Adoree Jackson doesn't, as of the moment, look like he's going to be a part of this team. So I had no problem in Newman being the pick in round 2. Clearly a ball-hawking safety, play in the box as well, and the Giants needed a starting safety. And they've gone down that road. It's worked out before. Landon Collins, Xavier McKinney, those day 2 safeties that they've had in the past. So let's hope Newman is the next in a long line. And as far as Drew Phillips goes, downfield speed, a guy who is probably going to start in the nickel this year. And by the way, Darnay Holmes has struggled in that Cordell Flott. Very young, very raw, still hasn't really developed to where they wanted him to be. And long-term, Andrew Phillips could be the starting outside corner of the Deontay Banks, which would mean you got 2 young guys in back-to-back years. So it's hard for me to kill it. Those were still big needs. It wasn't like the Giants had this loaded secondary. So I think they address need, team speed as well. When you talk about Tyrell Tracy, when you talk about Theo Johnson, when you talk about Malik Neighbors, this is an offense that has struggled to score and create mismatch nightmares. They're trying to do it. Oh, by the way, a lot of times overall, Bryce, I look at a draft and I think the guys you spend your 1, 2, and 3rd round picks on, those guys ultimately should be starters on your team at some point, or the pick is basically a failure. Even if they don't make it to a second contract, they need to see those guys start. When I look at day 3, a lot of that is lottery balls for me. I look at this day 3, and I already see significant potential roles for Theo Johnson and Tyrell Tracy, which, by the way, those are positions at tight end and running back that we scream about not using first-round assets on because we see throughout the league how often the tight end and running back positions end up getting filled on other teams significant snap-wise by guys taken on day 3 of the draft. The Giants filled that mold here.
Yeah, the one thing that I looked at in this draft, it's something I predicted earlier on, is that I thought the Giants were going to use a 3rd-round pick or a 4th-round pick for that running back. And I'm glad they waited until later on in the draft because at the end of the day, they addressed the needs that they needed to address the most. I don't think that Devin Singletary is going to be, your workhorse back. I think that Tyrone Tracy is going to be mixed in there, hopefully. We don't really know exactly what he's going to be. And Singletary has never been that guy. He's never been that 3-down back. So it remains to be seen. That's the reason why I thought the Giants would use a 3rd or a 4th-round pick on a running back. It's fine that they waited. It's fine that they waited. And I want to go back to the offensive line thing one more time. Because you saw a lot of commentary. Obviously, Giants fans are very in tune with what's going on with the team in the draft. You did not see a lot of complaining from fans who, were upset that the Giants didn't draft an offensive lineman. When you said that, I mean, I knew it obviously in the back of my mind, but it really didn't become clear to me until you said that the Giants, for the first time in what seems to be a really long time, haven't used a draft pick or one of these late-round flyers on a defensive or offensive lineman. And I think that says a lot about what Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll did in the offseason, in free agency, with the trades. They addressed their needs, and then in the draft, they saw, and obviously they looked at the free agent market, they looked at the safeties that were out there, they saw the exorbitant deals that they were getting, and they're like, you know what? Maybe we could get the same type of level player in the 2nd round or the 3rd round like we did, as you mentioned, Xavier McKinney, Landon Collins. Those guys turned out to be perennial starters on the team, ended up getting big contracts from other teams. So This is something that has worked for them in the past, whether it be Gelman, whether it be, I mean, these were Gelman picks, but whether they be Joe Shane picks now. They've worked for the Giants in the past. There was no reason why you need to devote significant assets in a trade for a safety or, for a corner, or devote a significant amount of the money that you have in free agency to these guys when you know you could get ready starters, starter-ready guys in that second or third round. They addressed their needs in the best possible way, and it wasn't clear as day that they didn't use those picks for defensive and offensive linemen because, quite frankly, they're already the best they've been in both spots in years, Shaun.
And we're going to hit more on this when we talk about the quarterback situation in a couple minutes. But remember, I think every year we get really wrapped up in the draft. And obviously, it's the football breadcrumbs we have, the cookies we stuff on our mouths about our teams to draft. Next year, if the Giants completely ignore the offensive line and defensive line again, that becomes a pattern. You want every year, every other year to do that. It's okay on a year to not have that happen. Get another draft in a year to continue to reload and restock and revisit where you're at on a roster. So I would be stunned if next year we had the same trend where there was 0 O lineman or D lineman. Because remember, the ideal is build a team. Hopefully a lot of these guys get second contracts. You keep handing out third round guards and they all stick. Eventually you're gonna have to pay them too. I'm fine with this philosophy. And if they took one, I would have been fine too. But don't ignore the other positions. I think that is so vastly important. Also on the running back note, I just did jump in there and said, remember they signed Dante Miller, Turbo, the Columbia kid, all the speed in the world. You're hoping either him or Tracy speak. It's almost like taking two separate darts. That basically is a pseudo draft pick because he would have been, I'm forgetting the stupid draft that we got Dave Brown. What do we call that draft? Sam Beal, the supplemental draft. He would have been a supplemental guy, and they got him there. I don't know why I was digging deep there. Okay. Now, on Theo Johnson, Penn State, tight end, round 4. Feels good, tight end room, even if it doesn't have Darren Waller. This guy reminds me size-wise at 6'6" of Darren Waller, ironically. Even if Darren Waller wasn't a giant, I think his comp to me looks like a very athletic type freak. He, obviously measured well, did all that stuff well. Sometimes his game speed, from what I understand, is not necessarily the speed he portrays there. Looks like the kind of guy that, hopefully a Dable and this offense can develop. The one thing, though, that I found really odd, and goes against everything we said, Bryce, is when Joe Shane said at his press conference after day 3 that we had to take into account that Darren Waller may be retiring when making this pick. That comment drove me nuts. It drove me nuts because ultimately, forget Darren Waller. Darren Waller could play on this team this year. But if he doesn't, take the tight end anyway, if you like the tight end. And so what, you think that if Darren Waller doesn't retire now, suddenly he's going to play another 5 years? Clearly the writing is on the wall. We would look like Jet fans thinking that Aaron Rodgers is going to play another 4 or 5 years when he's already admitted he was 90% retired at one point. If he's that close to retirement, take him. And by the way, if he plays with Darren Waller this year, not a bad person for Theo Johnson to, figure this out and learn under. Does that mean maybe they'd have to carry a 4th or 5th tight end based on the guys they signed, a Stall, Manhertz, maybe, or maybe Manhertz doesn't make the team. You try to stash him on the practice squad, maybe, but that to me is irrelevant. And now, by the way, probably says the end of Lawrence Cager, I would say, if Darren Waller's gone.
You think so?
Feels a little redundant to have 3 pass-catching type tight ends, but I love the pick of Theo Johnson. I love the potential. I just hate the idea that Joe Shane would admit that Darren Waller, unless he's trying to put pressure on Darren Waller, but I hate he would give that. By the way,
and it's a little odd of it because it's like, all right, at this point, bro, make up your mind.
Right.
This is insane. Like, we don't want to hear about your divorce. We don't want to hear about all this garbage in the media on TMZ. Make up your mind. Stop producing songs or whatever he's doing and figure it out and let the Giants know what you're going to do. And they looked at that situation. They're like, well, either way. And as you mentioned, the Giants were not going to get impacted by that. It looks like they did at the end of the day. But I think they probably would have drafted a tight end either way. I just think that this is something that Joe Shane is trying to, subtly make a mention of. Because just like Giants fans, and we've been mentioning this the last 3 weeks, it's kind of absurd at this point now after the draft that they still have no answer on Darren Waller. And they were like, you know what, screw this. We're going to take matters into our own hands. Even if he comes back, we've got a lot of depth now at the position, especially if Darren Waller comes back. He's going to get hurt. I'm assuming he doesn't play he never plays the full 17 games. It's been a while. You have to look back to 2019 was the last time maybe he played all games in the season. That may be wrong. But either way, the fact that I have to go back that far, the fact that we even consider this right now as being reality for the Giants, I think is a little crazy for me. And I think going forward, if the Giants are really trying to put pressure on him, this won't be the last time you hear of something brewing for the Giants in terms of the tight end, whether they leak or whatever that Bellinger is going to be the starter, whatever it may be. I think that they've had enough and they're fed up with this. So it remains to be seen what happens with Darren Waller, but make a decision, bro. Like, come on, this is a joke.
On to the Daniel Jones dilemma. The Daniel Jones dilemma is what I'm going to call it. And this one got me really fired up in the past couple of days. All right, let's just start with this. We get a report on Monday, which makes me very glad that we're recording this on Tuesday. We get a report on Monday, and it wasn't really a report. It was Adam Schefter and Pat McAfee. He calls it speculating, but he put it out in the universe because it feels like he's being a little bit of a mouthpiece maybe for the Giants. That the Giants were actually trying to do that package up to number 3. Now, for anybody that's missed the package, it was obviously flip-flopping 6 and 3, giving up next year's 1, this year's pick 47, and I think it was pick 107. I think it was a Theo Johnson pick. They were going to mortgage all of that to the New England Patriots to go up to 3. Adam Schefter speculates that the Giants really wanted Joe Alt, and that is who they might have been trying to trade up for, which is the most absurd, embarrassing take that Adam Schefter, who's so respected, why would you even put that in the universe other than the Giants fed that to you, put it out there? Why would the Giants feed him to do that? Well, isn't it obvious? It is so blatantly clear that the Giants did offer that. The details got leaked, and it was to go up and get Drake May, and now they are sitting here with Daniel Jones, who they have said all the right things about this offseason because of this exact position. If they didn't get the quarterback they wanted, they knew they were going to have to play Daniel Jones. So how do you protect Daniel Jones from being asked as limited amount of questions this offseason about the Giants' path for a quarterback as possible, where you put in the universe that they were actually trying to trade for an offensive lineman to help him? It was such horse crap. Let's just call it like it is. It was such horse crap. Now, Mike Garafolo was really plugged in with the Giants, had a report on Tuesday morning that, of course, it was about Drake May, and that they, Dan Shire put this out too. They'd even contacted Chicago way early in the process about what it would take to get to number 1. Point being, any way you slice this, you walk out of this draft knowing that Joe Shane, Brian Dable, whoever else is pulling the strings, did everything they could in their power to try to get the quarterback, Drake May, that they targeted and wanted. And ultimately, they won too many games with Tommy DeVito, like we have said for weeks and months on here, to accomplish that goal. But they tried. They tried their damnedest. And what they didn't do was sit there and go, oh boy, I don't like Daniel Jones at quarterback. We better just go take somebody else because we didn't get our guy. They let J.J. McCarthy pass. They let Michael Penix pass. Maybe they would have traded back in late for one of those guys, maybe. But they stayed put and took the quarterback at 6. We talked about that. Took the wide receiver at 6. We talked about this on the last pod. But Bryce, I mean, I gotta help out Joe Shane here. For those who wanted Daniel Jones gone, he's getting killed. He's getting killed. Like, he ignored the position. He did everything he could to trade up.
I get that. But then on the other hand, it's like the revisionist history is crazy. Like, I don't understand. I do understand it. I get that you're not just managing personnel, you're managing egos and people's confidence. And this is really all about the Giants quarterback 1 and how he feels right now. And as a human being, anyone is going to be juxtaposed to the fact that there is other stuff going on. And that they're clearly your team is not fully interested in you being the quarterback of your own team. Like, how is that going to make anyone feel? If, let's say, Shaun at your job 2 weeks ago, Spike on his way out, he's like, yeah, I hired you, but like, I've been looking for the last 2 weeks to replace you. Like, how would you feel about that? Like, that's not something that's cool. And then after the fact that he's gone, he's like, well, actually, I wasn't looking to replace you. I was looking to add a 4th host to happen. I know. Like, it's garbage. Like, come on. Like, we know what you were trying to do. So I understand not going out there and fully stating it, but it's out there now. And you just kind of look stupid for trying to get that out there. And Schefter, That's a little confusing that Schefter would put that out there. It kind of makes me start to think about every report that we've ever read. Clearly, a lot of these reporters have their inside sources with certain teams, and they're the mouthpiece of these teams. But it just really goes to show, what can you really trust out there? Because that's just not true. And every Giant fan knows it.
This is the same thing with J.J. McCarthy rising up draft boards. You'd be prepared to smoke screens before and after. Now, on the Daniel Jones dilemma, I got to be that guy. I got to defend Daniel Jones here. I get it. Here's the thing. Daniel Jones, clearly the Giants didn't see enough last year. And the injuries, I still say the injuries above the play is the biggest thing. He's got 2 neck injuries in 3 years, coming off the ACL. He's had 1 full healthy year, and that was 2022 when they made the playoffs. That is not enough for a GM and a coach to put their stock in and go, this is our guy for the future. They gave him a contract with an out after 2 years for that reason. Okay, he failed last year. There's a lot of reasons he failed. A lot of it is on him, but a lot of it is truly on the injuries. And moving Azudu was their swing tackle with Evan Neal, and basically he went through a good stretch there, taking hits where he didn't have an NFL tackle. People get tired of the offensive line excuses and the wide receiver excuses. And I understand. And by the way, some quarterbacks can rise above. Daniel Jones hasn't. But just because you're tired of talking about those excuses don't mean they didn't exist. That being said, this idea that we are going to enter 2024 and the goal of people when they take Malik Neighbors, any naysayers who wanted a quarterback, well, who's going to throw him the ball? We've heard that. Who's going to throw him the ball? How could you possibly throw the ball? I mean, now we're going a little overboard on the disrespect of Daniel Jones, the player. Yeah, he's not an elite quarterback. He's also not like some dog turd, can't play the position when, if the offensive line gives him protection and he can function. And I know it. Have you ever seen a year more dismissed than the 2022 Giants? I understand they lost to Philly, got their ass beat. They did go 9-7-1. Probably should have won a 10th game in Washington. Oh, by the way, on a big throw Daniel Jones made down the sideline, only to have Feliciano take a flexing penalty that pushed him out of field goal range. They should have won 10 games. They make the playoffs. He does something no quarterback in NFL history done with his legs and his arm in a playoff game. And it just gets thrown at what was Minnesota. It gets thrown out nonstop. Not for nothing. The roster as it stands now in terms of athleticism and where it's gotten. I know Saquon and McKinney are not here, but guess what? Malik Neighbors is here. Brian Burns and Bobby Okereke are here. The roster as it stands now is a better roster than the one they had in 2022. Now, does that mean I'm telling you they're making the playoffs? I'm not telling you that, but I'm also telling you I don't think that this year has to be some kind of they got no shot to compete at the last couple of wild card spots of the NFC. If Daniel Jones is healthy and they have this real team speed, the Giants could certainly, they won 6 games last year, and when you factor in the Ram game, the Jet game, the Bill game, they could have won 9 games with 3 quarterbacks playing.
Yeah.
So how could you tell me a 9-win team, a 6-win team, a team that's continued to get better with that quarterback, suddenly who's throwing these guys the ball and they can't compete this year? I know the hate for Daniel Jones is there, and I understand a lot of it, but I think we've gone way, way overboard on the idea that this team can't possibly function with Daniel Jones at quarterback this year.
And people forget he played a flawless game against the Vikings in the playoffs. A flawless.
Yeah. And I know he stunk the next week. I get it.
I understand, but you have to give him credit for what he did in that season and what he did in that playoff game. And if you put Jared Goff, you put Kirk Cousins behind the Giants' offensive line,
Brock Purdy,
5 weeks of the year last year, they are all falling flat on their faces. And I go back and forth on this because on one hand, you got to put some of the blame on Daniel Jones and some of his decision-making earlier on in his career, the fumbling, the interceptions, whatever. But he has really gotten dealt a bad hand. And the injury stuff is completely on him. The fact that he is unable to just slide down and is always taking massive hits, that's one thing. The other thing is the fact that he just has 1 or 2 seconds to respond in the pocket, or at least he has historically. So I'm like hot and cold on Daniel Jones. There is a side of me that feels bad for him, that, on a personal level, that feels like this is just all unfair, that this is being placed on him. But the other side of it is like, this is it. Look, as you said, on paper, this is the best Giants team that he's ever had. Where are the excuses? There aren't any anymore. You have to go out and perform. You can't get hurt. This is it. All this external motivation you should put to good use. and go out there.
By the way, it may not even matter. Like, he could win 10 games and they could still move on because of that out in the clause. Because, again, even if he's healthy this year, why would you trust he's going to be healthy in 2025, 2026? So I'm not sitting here playing, like telling you, well, now Daniel Jones has a chance to prove he's the long-term guy. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is for the season 2024, where you're going to reevaluate the quarterback at the end of the year, the assumption that you didn't address quarterback this year, therefore this year's a wash. I think it's nuts. I think it's nuts. And again,
he's a competent quarterback. At the end of the day, he's like, there's a reason why they paid it. Say what you want about it being an overpay. They did it. They wouldn't have done it if they didn't think other teams would have given him a similar amount of money. They would have. And they still got the out after 2 years. They could have given him a 4-year deal, all guaranteed. They would have been screwed, and they did it. So they left their options open.
And there's still going to be, let's see if they add another corner at the end of free agency. I have other questions in the whole. The roster's certainly not perfect, but there is a chance in August, probably a good chance, that I will make the case on whether the Giants can absolutely be in the mix of the playoffs. And by the way, when you think about the NFC, nobody's really run away with those last 2 wildcard spots the last 2 years. They can. They absolutely can if they're well coached and Daniel Jones is healthy. So it's just great. Who's going to throw him the ball? What? We're acting as if he's Zach Wilson. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. All right, with that. Now this is the critical time of the offseason. The draft has passed. So between here and when the preseason starts in August, we're still going to pump out these pods, whether it's Bryce, whether it's me and Bryce. I know I'm going to be back. I'm going to be taking a little vacation here. After the schedule release, we'll break that all down. I'll go over the road trips you should take, the weeks they happen, all of that stuff like we've done the last couple of years. But with that, you want to keep up with the podcast, we greatly appreciate it. Go download and subscribe to One Giant Step free on the Audacy app and everywhere podcasts are available. He's Bryce Gelman. You can follow him on Twitter at Bryce Gelman. I'm Shaun Morash. You can follow me at Shaun Morash. We appreciate all of you guys sticking with us for our draft coverage the last couple of weeks. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for listening along, and thank you all for taking one giant step with us.